Willow, Season 1 is out on Disney+, 8 episodes, 45 minutes each. It's a follow-up show to the 1988 classic fantasy film under the same title, Willow. Once again, it's an adventure fantasy with a group of characters teaming up and journeying halfway across the world to defeat a great evil. This story takes place 17 years after the events of the film. Willow now takes a mentor role to the grown up already, she's 17, Elora Danan, and a group of other teenagers, as together they go on this quest to save a kidnapped prince and defeat the evil crone who wants to bring about the end of the world. Now, this was such a strange show for me to think about and to review, because I remember seeing the first episode and quite enjoying it. I thought it promised a similar mix of classic fantasy adventure and light-hearted, goofy humor to the style of the original movie. Then for the next couple of episodes, I started to really dislike it, because I thought that the story is mostly nonsense. The whole thing looks uninspired in terms of being shot on green screens or perhaps the volume, but clearly not on real locations. And perhaps most of all, I grew to hate its sense of humor, because the whole thing is not written like a fantasy story, but rather like a very modern Gen Z teenage comedy dressed up in fantasy clothes. The language especially is at times just jarring. And yeah, I thought about the original film Willow. It didn't take itself seriously as well, but I thought about the difference, and I think it's that in Willow, the film itself wasn't very serious, but the characters in it treated themselves for the most part seriously, and the humor came from the fact that even though they felt like real people, they ended up in all these wacky situations. Whereas in Willow, the TV show, it almost feels like the characters themselves are not treating anything going on around them seriously. They all sort of behave as this was all a joke or a D&D campaign. Then again, around episode 5 or 6, I thought to myself, well, it's kind of growing on me. I mean, it's still not my cup of tea exactly, but it is consistent. It is clearly what the show was going for, and within that framework, I have to admit it does kind of work. And, when I started looking at it through this new lens, like, again, instead of treating it as a real fantasy show, I imagined instead a group of modern-day teenagers playing a silly D&D campaign. It started to kind of click for me. I began to somewhat understand it and not treat it as harshly as a result. And then the final episode made it all worse again, because it's just a CGI-filled nonsense festival that ends up being equal parts predictable and uninspired and nonsensical. I mean, the heroes kind of win at the end, but really nothing is resolved in any sort of permanent way. And they even say that themselves. Well, we're leaving this evil city now, and we know that we still haven't killed the big bad, but hey, we'll do it later at some point, I guess. And then the ending teases 2 more seasons to come. So that kind of left a bad taste in my mouth, and at the end of the day, I would say that the show was pretty mediocre overall. I think that this CGI, the locations or lack thereof, and the plot in general are all very weak. So is some of the acting, including, unfortunately, Warwick Davis, who I like, but I don't think he's doing an excellent job here. On the other hand, there is an undeniable charm in some of the characters and their interactions, and some of the humor works as well, but with the caveat that it's absolutely not what you'd expect from typical fantasy. It uses modern language, modern expressions, modern quips, and it definitely isn't for everybody. If you're on the younger side and enjoy the sort of lighter type of fantasy, I think you might honestly give it a go, and perhaps you'll find it entertaining. But if, like me, you're a bit older and you like fantasy to feel like fantasy, then I'd rather steer clear of Willow.